I'm trying things this way because I'm really tired of how the oh man, this filter is like insane. Anyway, obviously a lot of things need some modifications here because you know it's funny how technology has reached kind of this point that everything is so there's so much everything can do that it feels pretty stifling actually. I want to share a little bit about what ritual actually is. You know, people seem to think that ritual is, you know, something that is, it doesn't affect our daily lives in a way that is actually scientifically already been proven scientifically. See, I don't know if people know this, but there was time in history where, for example, there was a surgeon named Dr. Charles Bell who couldn't get into art school, but he got into medical school, and he was a watercolorist. And what made him so special was that, unlike other surgeons of his time or even artists of his time, he wasn't drawing human bodies like they were cadavers. He actually drew them as patients when they were coming out of war and out of battle, for example, the Battle of Waterloo, with limbs gone, with emotion. He painted these watercolors to put notes in the margin. And he was responding to something very new. I mean, the machines of war had made it so that human beings were surviving things that nobody had ever seen. And that is, in fact, how we even came to know something known as Bell's palsy. And I hope that is pretty clear, that I don't have to explain and illustrate how important that is, especially now post-COVID. But let me ask you, did he discover that we were completely wrong about, you know, we were completely wrong about the entire nervous system because he was following the science? No. You can't follow science. That's programming. That's coding something for a result you want. He observed and painted. That's what he did. And you have to make choices. Like, what did he choose to paint? Did he paint the biology or the physiology? Did he paint the wound in sepsis or the hand in a grip or the face grimacing in pain? And why? We didn't start doing surgery in that sterile environment that we're all accustomed to now. Operating theaters were called theaters for a reason. That word. First theaters came from churches, tennis courts. In fact, the courtroom came from a tennis court. So I'm going to read to you now something called Ritual Ceremony and Super Sunday by Gregor T. Goethals. This is it. Pardon that it's reversed. These are things which I think a lot of the people who were familiar with are dead now, not just over time, but I think Fran Lebowitz was right when she said that what we lost during and from HIV/AIDS. Look at this. I've got a dog on my foot, so as I'm looking for a lighter, I'm kind of trapped here. Oh, the sugar plum. I'm gonna get a lighter and I'm gonna plug this in a little bit, and I'm gonna hope that some people are watching this and that doing it this way somehow will override the trend I've had lately to lose streams on YouTube or on X, which is ironic considering Zoom is, as we all know, Chinese owned, right? It's kind of funny, isn't it? We are really our worst enemy. I dare say that influencer culture, as such, whatever that means, is the worst parts of capitalism. And of course, again, that word capitalism comes from the same person who created communism. So the free market is not all that it's not all that free when everyone's just free to choose slavery, right? Oh boy. Anyway, got on bum. So what's a ritual? Well, the dancing nurses and what we were watching there and having streamed to us, that was a weaponization of ritual. And it was a very smart one. And that's why it felt so creepy. And that's also why when I just showed everyone what was going on, I didn't have to break it down. I just showed it. I kind of basically did exactly what I would have done had I been in Tish. And people felt comfortable and better about it for very good reason. They did because that's the difference between knowing something and making sense of something. They're not the same thing. Gnosis and knowledge, it's not everything. Um, the thing that as it, my core thesis of all of this is pretty simple. That what occurred in with the Industrial Revolution, but primarily with use of war. And listen, I will argue with anyone who says that there is no purpose to war, that war is just hell, that war is just pointless. Well, one thing we know from ritual is, for example, there is a function and transformation of ritual killing, hunting, war, fighting. One can even talk about the way in which men used to ritually defend their own honor or other people's honor by going to um, meet at dawn. The use of spectacle, turning something that should be sacred into something that is worse than even secular, that's a problem. Um, there should be a right to privacy, even if it's not. There's a basic, moral understanding that certain things should not be spectacle. Um, before I get into something which I think will make a lot of sense, I want to talk a little bit about what it is about. Just going to read a portion of this about ritual killing. Walter Burkert writes, "The function and transformation of ritual killing in Homo Nikens, the anthropology of ancient Greek sacrificial ritual and myth," published in 1983. And it's talking about why it developed amongst ancient cultures. Hunting behavior became established and at the same time transferable through ritualization. In this way, it was preserved long after the time of the primitive hunter. The first pieces of art that we find in the world were actually cave paintings of hunts. And we see the artist, we see the way in which art comes from something else, comes from elsewhere. It's much more than just simply something that is it's transformative. It communicates something, but not in a way that is always clear and direct. This cannot be explained simply by the psychological mechanisms of imitation and imprinting, whereby customs are inherited. These rituals were indispensable because of the particular thing they accomplished. The only prehistoric and historic groups obviously able to assert themselves were those held together by the ritual power to kill. The earliest male societies banded together for collective killing in the hunt. Through solidarity and cooperative organization, and by establishing an inviolable order, the sacrificial ritual gave society its form. As ethology has shown, a sense of community arises from collective aggression. A smile can, of course, establish contact, and a crying child touches our hearts. But in all human societies, seriousness takes precedence over friendliness and compassion. A community bound by oaths is united in the sacred shiver of awe and enthusiasm, the relic of an aggressive reflex that made the hairs bristle, in a feeling of strength and readiness. This must then be released in an act. The sacrificial ritual provides the occasion for killing and bloodshed. Whether in Israel, Greece, or Rome, no agreement, no contract, no alliance can be made without sacrifice. And in the language of the oath, the object of aggression that is to be struck and cut becomes virtually identical with the covenant itself. Foedus ferere. And then in the ancient Greek, the collective term for the organs of the sacrificial animal. Families and guilds organize themselves into sacrificial communities, so too cities at a festival, as well as gatherings of larger political groups. The inhabitants of the Peloponnesus, the island of Pelops, meet at Pelops's grave for sacrifice at Olympia. The islanders celebrate in Delos, the Ionian city, slaughter a bull to Poseidon at Mycale. In the time of Cicero, the cities of the Latin League still had the right to demand their portion of meat. From sacrifice of a bull to Jupiter or Latarius. The Ionian League, headed by Athens, first met at Delos, later Athens, and exacted a phallus for the procession at the Dionysia at Athens and a cow for the Panathenaea. It is in the sacrificial procession that the empire's power becomes manifest. The closer the bond, the more gruesome the ritual. Those who swear an oath must touch the blood from the accompanying sacrifice and even step on the testicles of the castrated victim. They must eat the meat of the victim as well, or at least the collective term for the organs of the sacrificial animal. It was generally believed that conspiracies practiced human sacrifice and cannibalism, and in a secularized form among Athenian heterari, collective killing was an expression of loyalty. Here, the sacrilegium, normally contained in the sacrum, no longer remains within the confines of the ritual. In a sacrifice, the circle of participants is segregated from the outside world. Complicated social structures find expression in the diverse roles the participants assume in the course of the ritual, from the various beginnings through prayer, slaughter, skinning, and cutting up, to roasting, and above all, distributing the meat. There is a lord of the sacrifice who demonstrates his vitae nexkik potessas, only anesis potessas, but it seems e contrario to include the power of life. And as for the rest, each participant has a set of function and acts according to a precisely fixed order. The sacrificial community is thus a model of society as a whole, dividing according to occupation and rank. Hence, the hierarchies manifested in the ceremony are given great social importance and are taken very seriously. An ancient epic, the Bide, relates that Oedipus cursed his sons because he was given the wrong piece of sacrificial meat. I just had a thought, people forget that Esau sacrificed his birthright for a bowl of lentils, a meal that was served during mourning. It wasn't the bowl of lentils themselves, it was the reduction of the sacred receipt. Harmodius murdered Hipparchus, Hystaspes, because his sister had been denied the honor of being a basket carrier in Parthenia, and the Corinthians turned against the Corsicans, not least of all because in their common festivals they would not allow them the customary privilege of founders, and at their sacrifices they did not perform the rites of beginning for men of Corinth, as the other colonies did. This ultimately resulted in the Peloponnesian War. The sacrificial meal is particularly subject to sacred laws that regulate social interaction in distributing, giving, and taking. Right now, we're in the middle of Pesach. For those who might be watching this in the future, the symbol of the sacrificial lamb is part of the Pesach table. The very fact that eating became ceremonial clearly distinguishes human behavior from animal. Once the deadly knife has been used on the victim, intraspecific aggression must be set aside. This is accomplished through an eating inhibition evoked by rituals that excite anxiety and guilt. Since a hunting society must support women and children, abstinence becomes an excuse. We killed for the sake of others. Thus, there is often a rule that the killer, the sacrificer himself, must refrain from eating. And this is not so only in human sacrifice. Hermes, the cattle killer, must also obey this rule, and similarly, the Hinari were excluded from the meal and the sacrifice at the Ara Maxima. Sometimes there is a rule that sacrificial meat must be sold at once. In this way, the ritual inhibition becomes an economic factor. The taboo makes social interaction all the more intense. The shock felt in the act of killing is answered later by consolidation. Guilt is followed by reparation, destruction by reconstruction. Its simplest manifestation is in the custom of collecting bones, of raising the skull, the horns, or the antlers, thereby establishing an order whose power resides in its contrast to what went before. In the experience of killing, one perceives the sacredness of life. It is nourished and perpetuated by death. This paradox is embodied, acted out, and generalized in the ritual. Whatever is to endure and be effective must pass through a sacrifice, which opens and reseals the abyss of annihilation. Building sacrifices, for example, are for this reason widespread. A house, a bridge, or a dam will stay strong only if something lies slaughtered beneath it. One of the most detailed Latin descriptions of a sacrifice depicts the erection of a border stone. A sacrificial animal would be slaughtered in a pit and burned together with offerings of incense, fruit, honey, and wine. The stone was then placed on top of the remains while they were still hot. Thereafter, neighbors would return regularly on the anniversary of that sacrifice to repeat it. Similarly, altars and statues can be set up over a victim in the course of a ritual. Any new creation, even the birth of music, requires ritual killing. Underlying the practical use of bone flutes, turtle-shelled lyres, and the tympanum covered with cowhide is the idea that the overwhelming power of music comes from a transformation and overcoming of death. Thus, a slain man is easily made a hero or even a god precisely because of his horrible end. In any case, apotheosis is always preceded by death. Sacrifice transforms us. By going through the irreversible act, we reach a new plane. Whenever a new step is taken, consciously and irrevocably, it is inevitably connected with sacrifice. Thus, when crossing frontiers or rivers, there are this is another ancient Greek word, what is it? There are, this is a footnote, there are, footnote says, for the special importance of these rituals for Spartans, see Thucydides 5 or Pritchett. At the crossing of the Hellespont, Xerxes burned incense, poured libations, and sank valuable objects into the sea. Alexander made numerous sacrifices to the same end. When opening an assembly, there are strange purifications. When passing into a new age group or on entering an exclusive society, there will be sacrifice. Before the sacrifice, there is a period of abstinence. And if after it new barriers are erected as a sort of reparation, their limits can give new definitions to life. It is followed by a predetermined logos or lifestyle. The sacrifice becomes an initiation. Those who have undergone the unspeakable are both exonerated and consecrated, as expressed in the Greek word. Another one, I don't know my ancient Greece. I really wish I could go just attend Boston and study ancient Greece for a while. Wish I had the liberty to do that. Thus, the new lifestyle and the sacrifice at its inception are almost commentary. Homophagy is followed by vegetarianism. Killing justifies and affirms life. It makes us conscious of the new order and brings it to power. Following Rudolf Otto, students of religion have used the following concepts to describe the experience of the holy: terror, bliss, and recognition of an absolute authority. Mysterium, tremendum, fascins, and augustum. The most thrilling and impressive combination of these elements occurs in sacrificial ritual: the shock of the deadly blow and the flowing blood, the bodily and spiritual rapture of festive eating, the strict order surrounding the whole process. These are sacra par excellence. Above all, the young must confront the holy again and again, so that the ancestral tradition will become their own. Although we can understand the persistence of sacrificial ritual through its social function, this by no means excludes change as an explanation. Ritual is a pattern of action, redirected to serve for communication. And this means that the terms of expression are open to substitution, i.e. symbolization. This occurs even in the insect world when a resourceful male offers his bride a white balloon or veil instead of an edible wedding gift. Every communication is symbolic, inasmuch as it does not use the real object it wants to communicate, but substitutes a sign that is familiar to and hence understood by the addressee. The object serving as a sign is exchangeable. If the sender and the receiver are sufficiently familiar with one another, the complex of signs can be greatly reduced. On the other hand, when in competition with rival communications, the sign is exaggerated and heightened. Substitute signs thus used, whether consisting of natural or artificial objects, pictures, cries, or words, may be called symbols in a pregnant sense. They are not chosen arbitrarily, but are taken from a continuous tradition. They are neither independent nor self-evident, but bound to the system in which they function. Their richness of meaning coincides with the complex effects they produce in predetermined interactions. In ritual aggression, the ends and the means of aggression are exchangeable. Even mammals tear up tufts of grass or shred tree bark when performing the threatening rituals that both introduce and postpone a fight. The triumphant cries of the gray-legged goose are directed toward a purely imaginary interloper. In human ritual, too, the aggressive gesture can become so important that its object is unessential. The wildest form of destruction, that of tearing an object to pieces, can be carried out on an ivy plant. And instead of a deadly club, a safe and flexible narthex stalk can be used. Spiritual forces thus find release in a harmless game, which heightens the sense of social ordering by means of dramatization. Yet the theatrical character of the ritual may become so obvious here that it imperils its necessary function in groups shaped by aggression, especially in the younger generation. Forces that question the acceptance of tradition become active. Willfulness stands in the way of the impulse to imitate. Thus, along with its theatricality, human ritual must always have a strong underlying component of seriousness. And this means that time and time again, there is a regression from symbolism to reality. A non instinctive ritual transmitted by human beings can fulfill its communicatory function only if it avails itself of a pragmatism that is unquestioningly real. Pause here. Remember, I said that the dancing nurses were ritual and that it was Socreality. It wasn't real. Socreality is not real. It's artifice. That's why it was so damn creepy. And why particularly creepy was the amount of death around it. In the hunting ritual, aggression between men was redirected toward an animal quarry, which was thereby raised to the status of a personality, a blood relation, even a father. It became the object of a comedy of innocence. But because of the necessity of food, the hard underpinning of reality was never questioned. This all changed when mankind took its most important step, its mastery of the environment. In the Neolithic Revolution, the invention of agriculture some 10,000 years ago, thereafter, hunting was basically dispensable. Characteristically, however, it was retained even in advanced cultures as a ritual status symbol. The pharaoh was celebrated as a hunter, as were his counterparts in Babylon and Nineveh. The Persian kings maintained animal parks for hunting, and Alexander followed in their footsteps. I recently heard an episode of the Rubin Report. No, sorry, I think it was Tucker Carlson actually, interviewing a congressman who was talking about how someone he knew who was part of the royal family of Saudi Arabia, who he, along with many of the other royals, were maintaining falconry. And he had offered to locate Osama bin Laden because his falcons had been seen. And that was ignored. I think that's more meaningful than even we think, because not everything is political. I'm going to continue. Of course, Alexander followed in their footsteps. It was no longer a question of catching one's dinner, but purely a demonstration of the ruler's power to kill. Thus, the most prestigious quarry was the beast of prey. Through this emphasis, the sport remained pragmatic and serious. Heracles, the bearer of the club, was more popular as a lion killer than as the tamer of the bull. We find transitional phase documented at Kettle Hayuk. The most important religious symbol in this farming town where goat and sheep had long been domesticated was a pair of horns from the wild bull. And wall paintings contain clear, thrilling depictions of the ritual hunt of a band of leopard men. We can even trace the gradual extinction of wild cattle in Catalhayuk, though not the critical step that followed. In place of the dwindling bands of wild animals, domestic ones were now used for sacrifice. The power of the traditional ritual to bind thus remained intact. The animal must, of course, now be removed from the everyday world. It must become sacred. Hence the adornment and the procession, and sometimes the animal being set free and recaptured. Hence, too, the many steps of beginning, the incense and the music, in addition to the action which is no longer dangerous or even difficult. There are also words, prayers to the stronger powers and myths that tell of them. I encourage anyone to really look into what makes an animal kosher or not, what makes food kosher or not. The reality of death and flowing blood is an unmitigated presence, perhaps all the more intense because the reaction is now inspired by a domestic animal, a familiar member of the household. The rapture attendant on eating game in the sacrificial meal is no less real now. Moreover, the domestic animal is a possession which must be given away. Thus, in addition to the old fundamental ambivalence of life and death in a sacrifice, there is now also renunciation and gratification. Even more than before, a sacred order is presumed and confirmed in this critical situation. In any case, with the integration of animal sacrifice into agricultural society, a very stable socio-religious structure was established, which was to survive many thousands of years. No less important was the expanded symbolism brought about by the newfound sources of food from farming, barley, wheat, and the fruit of the vine, and added to the themes of ritual killing. The ritual pattern was so strong and inflexible that a festival meal without the preliminary horror of death would have not been a festival at all. The farmer had to be just as reliable, enduring, and farsighted as the hunter. In particular, it was no mean task to overcome the inclination to eat the seed grain rather than throw it on the ground in the mere hope that something would grow. Here, too, the individual's desire for immediate profit could be controlled by the sacred tradition of the hunting ritual, which established the old order in a new context, renunciation and abstinence for the sake of long-range success, and with it a new order. Thus, the harvest celebrated in a hunting festival and in a sacrifice, gathering and storing at the sacred place now took on a new reality. For those fellow Jews out there, today is the sixth day of the Yom. Counting what? Most importantly, the seed grain could not be touched as long as it was stored in sacred granaries, those mysterious half-buried depositories of wealth. At the same time, aggression had to look for new objects. Consequently, farming implements assumed the character of weapons. After all, a plow, a sickle, and a pestle were all used for chopping, cutting, and tearing apart. Cutting the wheat could thus become a symbolic substitute for castration. Grinding the grain and pressing the wine could take the place of tearing up an animal in the hunt or sacrifice. Plowing and sowing could be seen as preliminary sacrificial renunciations. We have already shown how, in hunting ritual, death gives way to a new order of life. In agriculture, the victory of life can be felt with even greater immediacy. The vine that has been pruned will bear all the more fruit. The grain that was buried in the earth sends up new shoots toward the light. Sacrifice for ritual's power to bind is preserved on this level as well. Contracts are sealed with libations of wine, and weddings are celebrated by cutting up cake or bread. Cutting or breaking must still precede eating. The symbolism could easily become detached, were it not for a counterforce guiding it back to the frightening reality. This occurs first of all in the myth, where the most gruesome tales of living creatures torn apart and of cannibalism are presented in conjunction with the achievements of civilized life. But the myth is not good enough. Blood sacrifice must be made at the harvest festival and at the preparations for it. Here, the savagery beneath the seeming civilized exterior is exercised. In Greece, as far back as we can see, the victims were animals. And in the tropics, the very regions that had more favorable climates, the planters regressed to regular human sacrifice, to cultic cannibalism. Only in this way, it was said, could the seed grow and the fruit ripen. Civilized life endures only by giving a ritual form to the brute force that still lurks in men. Thus, aggression is once again directed toward human beings. Although the male societies that had been superimposed on the family structure lost their ostensible function when the hunt was abandoned, they were reestablished among planters as secret or masked societies. At the center was a secret sacrifice, and at the aggression, there did not suffice. It was worked out within the society itself. The contrast between the sexes was now played up. Manderbund versus female power. The more so because women now shouldered the main burden, supporting the family according to the new agricultural method. Likewise, the conflict between the generations became highly dramatized in the initiation rituals. Deprived of its hunting quarry, the secret society made the initiated himself into a victim. The group's aggression became focused on the man, and he is forthwith killed, symbolically, of course. Sacrificial animal is substituted at the last minute. However, the bloodshed and the refined methods of torture are very real and guarantee the seriousness of the ritual. The gruesome evil at work in the ritual fulfills a function, i.e., to preserve a social structure over the course of generations. Once again, life rises up from the perils of death. Indeed, the individual experiences in himself how, after life had been endangered, there is a resurrection, a rebirth. To some extent, this too was still a game, a show. With the progressive growth of consciousness, civilization came to demand absolute seriousness. One could no longer pretend to kill men. For this reason, the death penalty became the strongest expression of governmental power, and as has often been shown, the criminal's execution at a public festival corresponded to a sacrificial ritual. In ancient times, the death penalty was not so much aimed at profane murderers as at those who entered an untouchable, sacred precinct, went into a house of the mysteries unconsecrated, or laid a branch upon the wrong altar. The taboo almost became an excuse to find a victim for releasing the sacred impulsiveness of aggression. There is another, far more serious way to divert aggression toward the outside world by integrating large groups of men in a common fighting spirit, i.e., war. History, as far back as we can trace it, is the history of conquests and wars. Ever since Thucydides, historians have tried to understand the necessity of these events and, if possible, make them predictable, but it is precisely the irrational, compulsive character of this behavior mechanism that confronts us more clearly today than ever before. War is ritual, self-portrayal, and self-affirmation of society. Male society finds stability in confronting death and defying it through a display of readiness to die and in the ecstasy of survival. Such modes of behavior are so bound up with the governmental systems and values of our society that even today, when modern military technology has made war so distant that its absurdity is patent, but it is beginning to be the source of discord rather than solidarity, still find emancipation from war lies far in the future. For the ancient world, hunting, sacrificing, and war were symbolically interchangeable. The pharaoh and Heracles could be lord of the hunt, lord of the sacrifice, and warrior. On grave reliefs, Greek youths appeared as hunters, warriors, or athletes. The emphasis may have well varied according to the social reality. A farmer, for instance, would put more weight on a sacrificial ritual, whereas the nomadic animal breeder, wary of slaughtering his proud possession, would become a conquesting warrior. Among the Greeks, a military expedition was prepared and ended by sacrificial ritual. There was sacrifice before setting off, then adornment and crowning with wreaths before battle, as if these were festival. A slaughtered victim introduced the subsequent deadly action, which in Homer is simply called, another ancient Greek word I can't read yet. Afterward, a monument, a tropion, was set upon the battlefield as a concentrated, enduring witness. This was followed by the solemn burial of the dead, a privilege for privilege the victor could not deny his defeated enemy. The burial, almost as important as the battle itself, was far more lasting in its consequences, for it left an enduring monument. It almost seems as though the aim of war is to gather dead warriors, just as the Aztecs waged war in order to take prisoners to use as sacrificial victims. The erected and consecrated monument is what endures, and it embodies the duty of the following generation. For war, necessary yet controlled because it is ritual, has this function above all. It must integrate the young into the patriotic community. The senatus resolves, the inventus must fight. As a rule, the Greeks, another word that I don't know, were for a period of 30 years at most. Each generation has the right and the obligation to have its war. What I believe is that in our misunderstanding of what it is to live and die, in our foolish need and so many people's hubristic attempt to become immortal, I think they could be. The one thing that endures memory is the thing that's being sacrificed now. Several months ago, or maybe it was even years now, actually, I was on what was called Twitter at the time, and I was seeing a bunch of people that I really admired fawning over a hydropower machine, as if they'd never heard of such a thing as hydropower. I found this really strange, not least of which because I grew up on Old Mill Road, but because water is the second oldest power source to fire. I found it striking that people forgot that. But this was in the middle of COVID. People also forgot what vaccines were, what a virus was, how easily we forgot. And then I was reminded of what the artist Eugenie Ionescu said, which is that all revolutions destroy culture, all revolutions destroy libraries of Alexandria. Today, I was very struck by the fact that I saw people arguing about what were the differences between the 1917 revolution and the American. But people forgot the American war for independence only became called a revolution relatively recently, when history was replaced with social studies. People will quote Jefferson and say that he said that, the blood of patriots, in the revolution. Nobody mentions that after the revolution in France, he wrote to John Adams how wrong he was. See, this is the difference. No, we did not have a revolution. Revolution is not the same thing as a war for independence. In fact, it's not even the same thing as a war. Revolution is the Socrealist way of destroying the rites of passage that enabled and illuminated our natural rights. It contradicts it. It's a ritual aimed at reversing Exodus. It's anti-human. It's anti-God. It's not real. And these words matter a great deal. I'm watching as some of the people with the most influence over our attempts to undo the scourge of Socrealism throughout our education system. Even there, this detail is being forgotten. In fact, the word liberalism being forgotten completely and undone, that's not a bug, but a feature of what we're dealing with. That word, when you've got a poet, Mao is a poet, writing something called Combating Liberalism. Why do people think he would say that? And what is liberalism? Liberalism is not a party. It's not. Any more than conservation is just a party. It's a word. It's a label for a party. Party is not real. Party is a construct. We don't need party. There's nothing natural about party. What is a party? Polemics, politics. It's fake power. It's not even a party. It's not very fun, at least. The idea that we are dealing with something that overtook the social sciences and humanities and the arts, and that somehow this can be won by ignoring that, is absolutely beyond me. Who survives? If this is a war on memory, who survives? What memories will survive? What will happen if everybody forgets and everyone suddenly struck, oh my gosh, I've never seen that before? Well, in that moment when I thought, People don't know what viruses are. People don't even remember what a vaccine is. People don't remember. Hell, they don't even remember what a grandma is. They don't remember what a daughter is. They don't remember what a child is. They don't remember what a mask is. They don't remember anything anymore because they've been sucked up into a ritual that's designed like a magic spell, and it is a dark magic. That is exactly what it is. But it's not supernatural. It's in fact supra personal. It's the magic of the ordinary being undone. May 1st, 1776, Weishaupt created his spin-off of the Freemasons, which is the Illuminati, his one, and it was not some brilliant scheme. It's mediocre, insecure, and revolting. And it was full of fear and wanted a sense of power through a way and a methodology of Socreality and cruelty and basic soulless idiocy that's no different than Mao, Hitler, or Colonel House, who funded Wilson. The monsters behind the monsters across all time. By focusing on them is another moment in a war on memory because for every one of those, we had a Ralph Waldo Emerson, we had a William Shakespeare, we've had a Tom Stoppard, and purges and totalitarianism aims to destroy and remove that memory from existence forever. Why? Only God knows, but I'll tell you that Bukowski put it brilliantly. He said, and this is why memorization, and I'm going to expand on this memory thing in a moment, fortifies you for what's ahead. And this was something that was passed along. And it was the duty of the educated and those well educated to do that. My mother passed that along to me from her father, who, if he had ever seen his daughter, hadn't seen his daughter or wife again, he may have lived. But because he was told to never see them again and refused to do that, when he was released, he was put right back. Then he died. I'm only here because he's not. And making his memories a blessing. It's not about hubris or ego. It's because I know that the remnant and what makes amalgamated wisdom and what makes the horrors and the loss and the terror of a machine's way of sacrificing and treating everyone as if they're a collective so awful is because it's a sin against God himself. It hurts God himself. I know it. I think every woman on some level knows it. I think every man on some level knew it also when they knew even that simple rule that you bury your dead and you allow your enemy to, that you love your enemy, or you honor them. There is honor. There is no honor anymore being talked about anywhere. It's a word that doesn't even mean anything. And honor is not about simply doing good or doing bad. It makes it possible that when you're alone with yourself, that you can actually live. So memorizing poems, memorizing words, memorizing verses of scripture, memorizing, always having something beyond yourself to hold on to. That would be a simple recognition that there's more out there. What death cults do is obliterate that, reduce us to being like animals. That's what the dancing nurses was doing. That's why it was so creepy. That's exactly why. But we are a lot more than that. Bukowski from Weimar was born in the Weimar Republic, and he was an American poet. In the 90s, he died, but he was primarily in California, and he wrote a lot of stuff that made him certainly disliked by quote unquote third wave feminists. Um, he was unapologetically sincere, genuine, and there was a time when such people were admired. Of course, a society can't have everybody like that, but knowing about it was something that's what education was about. That's what culture was being cultured was about. Culture without art is no culture at all. It's just it's just politics. It's just influence. It's just savage. Women are particularly good at this because no one likes to discuss the wickedness that can happen in a woman. But I think more importantly, I think we should never believe that a human spirit cannot recover from the worst things. That includes ours. But we also have to be aware that, like Bukowski said, in the genius of the crowd, he said that there is enough treachery, hatred, violence in the average human being to supply any given army on any given day. And the best at murder are those who preach against it. And the best at hate are those who preach love. And the best at war, finally, are those who preach peace. Those who preach God need God. Those who preach peace do not have peace. Those who preach love do not have love. Beware the preachers. Beware the knowers. Beware those who are always reading books. Beware those who detest poverty or are proud of it. Beware those who need constant crowds because they are nothing alone. Beware the average man, the average woman. Beware their love. Their love is average, seeks average. But there is genius in their hatred. There is enough genius in their hatred to kill you, to kill anybody. Not wanting solitude, not understanding solitude. They will attempt to destroy anything that differs from their own. Unable to create art, they will not understand art. They will see their failure as creators only as a failure of the world. Unable to love fully, they will see your love as incomplete, and then they will hate you. And their hatred will be perfect, like a shining diamond, like a knife, like a mountain, like a tiger, like hemlock, their finest art. I don't know what the solution is, but what I do know is to not acknowledge the fact human beings are not supposed to, en masse, witness so many things, so much cruelty, so much pain, so much death, so much suffering, without it having a mark. We've somehow equated being informed with being awake. There's very little that you can find about the Spanish flu, plague, or even World War One, because some things, when they are so terrible, it's not that they have to be forgotten. It's that there's restraint shown in what to do about it. And that restraint is what makes human beings have the capacity to do amazing things. It's actually that restraint. It's like this little girl here that was once, related to a wolf. It's her restraint. It's that little connective stuff between her right and left hemispheres that allows restraint. A life with no restraint there's no liberty there. That's not freedom. It's not. Ask any woman that. If our mistake, what we did to one another, believing we could have it all, believing that we can control everything, women know it's not true. Sometimes you need restraint. I think that there's a difference between restraint, self-imposed restraint, and censorship. Self-censoring is not the same thing as restraint. Our war for independence, this country, what made it remarkable was our restraint. And the key to understanding, I believe, the difference between Hamas and the IDF, despite what appears as restraint. But at what point is the worst among us recognizing that restraint can be used as the ultimate weapon? Our restraint, not speaking up, not being on the ground, not fighting for. Look, for every single person who was online talking about COVID, there were very few of us on the ground. There were very few of us. I find it really remarkable how dehumanization can happen when you are constantly being used and fed media, entertainment, politics like a spectacle. I'm tired of seeing it. Truth is that if we allow during these sacred times, it's Pesach and Easter Friday, it's like it was Christmas and Hanukkah. If we continue to allow people who have their own theology to destroy that's the sacredness, and we're doing the job for them. Herman Wouk said that in America, Judaism would not be destroyed by another Hitler. It would be destroyed by us by golfing on a Saturday. The Israelis know something that we take for granted. Our liberalism of spirit here being reduced into something that can be won with party. Alexander Hamilton warned us in Washington's farewell address what party spirit was. And I think it's very fair to say it's pretty simple. If we wanted to look at it this way, I don't think it's a false way to look at it. 2017, Barack Obama showed a speech in which he bastardized that very message and basically cast a spell across the country, somehow telling us the opposite of what the message was there. The American spirit is not party spirit. Party is taking an absolute consumption of everything and the ruins of public liberty. We have to stop. We have to stop doing that. Americans, we can. We have to. Our enemies, we have to understand them. It's not just that these are people who are simply character disordered or evil. No, this is another theology, no different than the one that overtook Jonestown. If we allow the amalgamated wisdom that manifests in the most remarkable expression of Exodus, because we forget that not everything can be peer reviewed, not everything is just purely logical, then we're stuck in this loop of asking why we shouldn't be masking kids. There was once artists who would have said, here's a reason you can't experience awe if you can't open your mouth. I mean that awe looks like this. You know how body is not separate from the soul or the spirit or emotion. It's not. We've raised an entire generation that is so uncomfortable with being awkward, and there's no honor in that. But I remember clearly about October 7th, and what troubles me to this day about it. When I heard a young man call his family, parents, delighting that how many Jews he had killed, like how many baskets he had made. People being used for revolution. We cannot conflate war with revolution. They are not the same thing. It's important to understand the influence of a brutal poet, a man who he himself, was able to take the brutality that he experienced by his father and then change it to the world. Read his poetry. It's there. And I sometimes wonder if somebody had actually bothered to tell Hitler that his composition was all wrong, that he couldn't draw a human being, and that if he wanted to be an artist, that he would have to work at it harder, rather than seeing the potential for somebody who was that poor in his vision to use him to propagate an idea that was about far more than genocide, that there would be a real power there. It used to be that certain things, there were gatekeepers for a good reason, and God for them. Because when the mediocre are teaching our children, then they're not learning. Memory isn't a blessing. There's no humility in that. There's no honor in that. And there's nothing. L'chaim is very different than just surviving. And my own grandmother used to say, you need conditions to suffer. People who are not taught well will strip yours away and then demand thanks for it. As for the people who were taught well, I don't understand. So many of you have so much access to power, audiences. What are you doing? I asked artists that question a while back, said that we weren't doing our job. I can't put a we here. I just want to know what you're doing and why you think for a moment that you can't do something more. You know, all the resources are there for you. And stop taking something so serious and making it so petty. I'm so tired of it. I'm so tired of people grabbing onto every moment that somebody that we admired one moment make a mistake and suddenly that thing that they're no longer good enough, these purity tests. We're all human beings. Nobody's perfect. Only he's perfect. Sure, you could choose nihilism, but there's no art in that. And as for artists out there, again, I'm going to say this. What we do, what we've always been doing, what we always love to do, we keep thinking that there's no collaboration that can make things worse. I mean, better rather, and it could only make it worse. Then we really don't know our craft. There's a story about Pasternak at the last writers conference. I heard the story being told by Douglas Murray to Eric Weinstein in the portal, and I wept when I heard it because it turns out that this sonnet that Pasternak happened to say happened to be the one that everyone in my class in the same lineage as Meyerhold, who was one of the first killed for this reason, because he was a formalist under a Socrealist diktat. Yeah, that same formalism that's discussed in the movie Clueless. We had to memorize it. I don't know why. It's one of those things. But I do know there's some things I don't need to know. So with that in mind, and if you're curious which one, just listen to that Portal episode and why I'm sharing this with you. It's for the same reason. But I'll add Shakespeare wrote it in about 1606, right after a plague, just as the new king was taking the throne, the Scottish king. He made the Scottish play. It was the first play they put on for the Scottish king. And yes, the play is the thing. Play is real. Anybody who tells you it's not, they're wrong. It's not phony. It's not fake. It's as real as ritual. It is an expression of something very, very real. More real than things that seem literal and real. In fact, it's the only thing. A world without that is no world that I would want to be part of. That's a dark age. And when you know everything, that's a dark age too. Or if you think you do, it's a terrible world. He wrote Winter's Tale, King Lear, and Macbeth at the same time as he wrote most of these sonnets. And whether it was a him with that name or someone else, it doesn't matter. It's enduring because there's truth in it, even when the facts don't matter. Facts don't make truth. They're not the same. Never were. Sonnet 30. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past. I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye, unused to flow for precious friends, hid in death's dateless night, and weep afresh, love's long since cancelled woe, and mourn the mourn the effect of many a vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of fore bemoaned moan which I knew pay, as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored, and sorrows end. May memory be a blessing. I almost forgot to tell you that that paper I read to you about ritual. I was going to read you another one, but that one about ritual and killing, the discussion of, how it's in that more than killing and in death, that something endures, that communication is possible, that the man can live on. There's a Greek myth about this that we've all but forgotten. Back to that story about us forgetting what hydropower was. So I thought about it and I said, yeah, well, the Romans forgot what aqueducts were. And then I thought, wait a minute, is it possible that that was just because they canceled all the aqueduct builders? And then I thought, did Rome have a cancel culture? I knew the Egyptians did. I know Stalin did. I know China does. I know we were and do. It's an oxymoron, of course, but they did. And sure enough, so did they. It's called dominating memory, domination and memory. Toward the end. And then I thought, wait a second there. We know that Roman mythology comes from Greek mythology. Oh, was there a goddess of memory? Sure there was, actually. And her name was Nimazine. And not only is it a word we're familiar with because of the word mnemonic device named after her, the word meme comes from her. I believe that a good meme, is one of the best examples of a new art period that we've been in for a while that's been overtaken by the false artifice of metamodernism. I like to call it romantic surrealism. And the theory behind it, suprahumanism. Because postmodern art was never the problem. Postmodern theory was simply Socrealism. That just like queer theory took over gay history and critical race theory took over from civil rights and women's liberation, replaced our strive for equality and a recognition of change times, whatever you want to call it. That's what postmodern theory did to postmodern art, a la Judith Butler, and I've watched it happen. It makes perfect sense. Memory without, or a world without memory is you can't have a civilization without memory. Revolution and its goal to spread its own genesis throughout the world. A genesis that is counter to life, a mechanized religion where everything is a collective purpose and an individual is not even thinkable. It's like Borg, has no memory. On X, you can see if you look, I tried to revive this myth and I told it. See, I'll try to retell it from heart now. Before Zeus and the Olympians were ruling on out from there was a war, and it was between the old gods known as the Titans and the new gods, the Olympians. Zeus led the army. The female Titans went under the ground, and the Zeus defeated the Titans, including Nimrod and all those other ones, spectacularly. And his brothers Hades and Poseidon, all of them, defeated the Titans and took their rightful place on Mount Olympus. In that moment, the female Titans emerged, including the daughter of Earth and Sky, or Uranus and Gaia, and her name was Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory. Everybody knows that Zeus was a bit wily, and few knows that the first woman, and this was not rape any more than in Harrison Bergeron, it's rape when he chooses his queen. The first was Mnemosyne, the Titaness. All of her brothers lost in battle. You see this again, by the way, in Henry V of Catherine. This is not an unknown moment. It's part of mythology. But what's fascinating is that they were coupled for 9 consecutive days and nights, and for each night, that coupling was birthed one of the muses, one for each sunrise to sunset, including, I'm going to screw up, but the 9 muses. People don't understand what a muse is, what they are symbolically, metaphorically, in a way of communicating something. So it was the coupling, or eros and Socreality, between Zeus and Mnemosyne that birthed Cleo, for example, who is the muse of history. See, or Talia, the muse of comedy. It's not like in the movies where, the muse whispers into your ear and tells you something. No, that's not how it works. Without Cleo, there is no history. There was no history before Cleo. And there is no history if there is no partnership between the muse and a human being, or human beings. She's the scribe, the witness. There is no, you cannot remake history. History is not just told by the victor. History is different than story. There's a way of telling a story about history, but they're not the same thing. Euterpe, wind instruments and music. Central poetry, astronomy, tragedy, dance. All of these are part of the muses. So is the coupling of Zeus with Mnemosyne that birthed them. Mnemosyne was also symbolically, or however you want to call it, her goddess aspect was on the earth, and then under the earth there was her other aspect, which was the river, the waters of Mnemosyne, which were adjacent to Lethe. Lethe was the river of forgetfulness, Mnemosyne, the river of memory. And when a soul would die, it would choose between the two waters. Which current would you take? If you went along Lethe, you would forget and be reborn with no memory. If you chose Mnemosyne, you would have a very different experience. But most, of course, would choose Lethe. I mean, that's the thing that I find so fascinating about these amalgamated wisdoms, because, see, I've heard a lot of people say that, Jews don't believe in hell or heaven. It's such a misunderstanding, because this idea God is one is it's not so simple. The non-dualism of everything, including non-duality, is a tricky thing to explain. But I will forever be grateful that I learned what hell means to us just before watching October 7th. I didn't know, but the idea knowing that hell is not a destination. God didn't create us to just send us to hell or allow us to come to heaven. No, that's not what Creator did. It's not why. Hell is the experience of the soul departing the body. These eyes will never get to see, I wish I had seen more of this or said more of this or done more of this. It's regret. It's regret. That separation, that's hell. That experience. But for the young, for a child, and for the victim of terror, they don't go through that. And that gave me great comfort. But it also made me recognize the hell that that boy was going through while he was calling his parents and delighting at how many Jews he had killed. Because a rite of passage was being denied to that man and was denied his entire life by sadists and masochists for revolution. And those are the same people who tortured my grandfather and left a terrible mark that continues on and on. And I can only hope doesn't only end with me, but also that I'm able to do something good. It helps what I know. See, when Nimazine is captured, we see the festive turn grotesque. You can see the muses, imagine, trying to rip the forgetful off their mother's body and very busy with this. And then suddenly we see what was honorable turn into spectacle. We see the honor of war turned into the brutality of the Roman amphitheater. We see the theater turn into delighting at torture. We see animal sacrifice descend into torture. Without memory, there is no civilization. Without memory, there is no reason. There is no logic. There is no morality. It doesn't exist. And the Greeks knew that prior to Hellenism, which was what Hanukkah was actually all about, right? The destruction of the temple, not by brutality, but by secularization. The forgetting of the sacred. See, the ancient Greeks, and I taste for the Jews, we knew that memory was pinnacle, so essential. The Titans were not worshipped by the ancient Greeks at all. They were considered archaic. But Mnemosyne was found in the temple of Dionysus in Athens and much, much more. And we don't know who she was. May her memory be a blessing. What was it? Psalm 19, I think. He redeemed my soul from battle because of the many who were with me. When I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. The most insidious element of totalitarianism and socialism is that it appears to be social, but what it creates is a total introversion. And that's getting worse and worse. If I can, I'm going to try to create something that's an alternative to all this for us to talk. I've talked about it a little bit. I'm going to try to keep going and making it, but life circumstances made that a little challenging. But I'm going to keep going with some faith. There's worse things than failure in the traditional success versus failure sense. And besides, we should fail. We fail. But screw your courage to the sticking place and will not fail. Yes, I know I'm quoting Lady Macbeth there, but without that moment, we would not have been able to know about Macbeth and his heroism. By the way, the saddest line in all of Shakespeare comes from that play, I think. It's the moment when Macduff is confronted by the messenger and told that all of his family has been killed. And the messenger says, don't worry, we'll avenge their death. And Macduff says, but he has no children. Sad in all of Shakespeare. Anyway, there are the dispassionate out there who don't understand these things, and they never will. But I guarantee you, I regret of not trying to do something much more when people like all of the artists and all of the great men and women who came before us that we admire, I don't want to experience. I don't want to answer to them when that day comes. I'm less worried about God and much more worried about them. Maybe that's just me. I'll keep trying. I hope you'll have the courage to reach out if you want. And if you don't want to keep coming in like this isn't going to work. I'm sorry, but when Americans believe in a revolution instead of in a war for independence, we are in big fucking trouble.